terms of converting after the call with their O-line on the field. Brownlee not waiting for the timeout. Yacht and Monroe jostling. Ort coming too, and Yacht skies them both. Ben Yacht going to the ceiling.
That was absolutely nasty from Ben Yacht. Ethan Fortin with the spike on behalf of Ben Yacht. And then Yacht against two defenders, bodying, charging, and going up over the top. Unbelievable catch.
Welcome back. It's Swing Pass. We've reached week 10. We're into the final month of the 2023 regular season. Just 4 weekends left before we get to the postseason. So every game going forward is going to have so much added significance. And boy, oh boy, do we have some tasty matchups for you ahead in this preview episode. Starting off with the 6-2 DC Breeze going to face the 8-0 New York Empire in the premier rivalry game in the league. These two teams battle it out to the wire every single time they match up, including back in week 3 in their first meeting this season when DC couldn't quite contain the Empire at home, the Empire prevailing in overtime in that game. We will get to that preview a little bit later. We will also be talking about Salt Lake at LA. That will be the free Friday Frisbee event tomorrow night on the AUDL YouTube. Be sure to tune in for that. West Coast Battles, the undefeated Salt Lake Shred gets set to go on their SoCal road trip starting first in LA against the 6-3 Aviators, who are on a 5-game winning streak, but have yet to beat a team with a winning record in 2023. So the Shred will give them certainly a test on Friday night. The Shred have just been firing all cylinders. One of the most exciting teams we have seen in the past few seasons. They continue to trend upward. They will be also taking on San Diego on Saturday night in the AUDL Game of the Week. The Growlers just 2-6. However, they will be near full strength on Saturday night, still have a myriad of offensive weapons, including Travis Dunn and the amazingly interesting rookie Max Gibson. We will talk about Salt Lake's second matchup of the weekend as well. Our fourth game that we will get to in this preview pod will be the 4-4 Boston Glory going on the road to take on the 4-4 Toronto Rush in a battle for third place in the East Division. That will be an important game, and we are sure that Philly will be tuning in for that one. The Phoenix will take on Montreal on Sunday, but they will be very eager to see the result between Boston and Toronto. Again, there are 10 total games ahead in the Week 10 slate. Be sure to check out the AUDL.com for more schedule information. We're just going to kind of wrap it into like 4 games of preview content. We'll also be talking a little bit about Colorado's road trip to the Pacific Northwest, going to Portland on Friday night and Seattle on Saturday. Colorado is sitting at 6-3, coming off of that mammoth win against Minnesota in last week's Game of the Week, 25-15 against the Wind Chill. Colorado looking to keep that momentum going. They look like a true power team this year. They went 2-0 on the Pacific Northwest road trip last season to get their franchise's first 2 wins. So it figures like the Summit will be entering Week 10 with a whole bunch of confidence. We'll get to that later. There's a whole bunch later, I guess. But for right now, starting at the top of this episode, we've got to talk about the big steak at the middle of the entree plate, and that is DC at New York. Every single time these two teams meet, it is the game to watch. It'll be again tomorrow night in New York, in New Rochelle. The Empire cannot get more excited to play DC. We heard in Jeff Babbitt's postgame interview after week 3, there's just so much respect between these two teams. It's really steel sharpening steel every single time they meet. Daniel, what are you most looking forward to in this matchup? There aren't a whole bunch of absences. I shouldn't say that. DC has some pretty significant absences in AJ Merriman, Ben Ort, and Jacques Nissen, as well as Cole Jurek still being questionable. He's missed the past few weeks with a foot injury. He's going to be a game time decision. DC just has so many solutions to their lineups and has such depth that it feels like some of these absences may not be so important for the Breeze. However, against a team like New York, every single player matters. Merriman, Ort, Nissen have all been fantastic for the Breeze in 2023. So I'm just going to pack up how I started that whole segment. But
Yeah.
for New York, they will be out Elliot Chartok as well as Breton Tan. Otherwise, it will be the premier Empire lineup going into Week 10. I'll kick it back now again to you. Daniel, what are you most looking forward to in this matchup going into tomorrow night?
I think what I'm most interested in is DC's rotations and specifically where they're going to use Rowan McDonald. I mean, we've seen, 3 games this year, I think he's played. More O points than D points. He got started the year as this D-line quarterback. Obviously, that was big news, having switched over the 2018 MVP, who's been dominant offensively, to D-line. And I don't know, I just haven't been he hasn't had a very loud season. There haven't been so many statement Rowan moments. But in games against New York, I feel like it's just another opportunity for him to kind of rise above it all and really take things into his own hands when he needs to. I just don't know if that's going to be offensively or defensively. And then you have a guy like Thomas Edmonds, started the year on offense, just played, I think the past 2 games on that road trip, played, I think, fully defense, and makes some amazing defensive plays. And so I'm liking him as a defensive playmaker. I think I still like Rowan more on offense, but TBD. I just think with some of these absences that you mentioned, like Ben Ort, Jacques Nissen, maybe they'll want a little bit more veteran leadership on that O-line. So I think I'm just curious to see how those lines shake out. And then if there's any in-game adjustments, any movement between those lines throughout the game. So that's where my focus is. And then on the other side, I would say the Elliot Chartok absence is always somewhat notable, because not only is he a starting handler and a critical part of that backfield, he also drives so much of that vertical dimension. It's him and Asgar are basically the huckers in that offense. Yes, Jack Williams at times will let loose deep, but without Chartok, it's gonna kind of have to come from Ryan Asgar in that first meeting, but first of their recent buzzer beater meetings. Last year's East Division Championship game, Elliot Chartok was...
There's so many, you need to be a lot more specific.
Yeah. So basically, my point is that once they took away Asgar's ability to shoot deep, that offense just got a lot more one-dimensional, and I think that worked in DC's defense's favor. It just restricted the amount of big playmaking, highlight reel plays that New York can make. And so if they're missing, one of those shooters on offense, I do think that could have a decent impact. But Asgar was very not bothered in their last meeting. So that's another thing to watch, is just what can they ever do about Ryan Asgar, and can they repeat the success they had at the end of last season?
I've got to pump some brakes on the whole Asgar and Elliot Chartok are the only shooters in this offense. You're also leaving out John Lithia, who continues to add to his throwing dimension. You're also leaving out Charles Weinberg, one of the best continuation throwers. You're also leaving off his brother, Oliver Chartok, who was incredible initiating as a vertical thrower in the first meeting between DC and New York this year. So I understand that Elliot Chartok has been fantastic in his role, and I do think...
Do you want the stats?
Apparent, but I don't think the Empire lack deep throwers without him. I think they can very much.
I've just pulled up the hucking stats. 16 completed hucks this year for Ryan Asgar.
I'm not disputing the importance of Elliot
No. I'm just telling you that this is significant.
You are saying
10 completed hucks for Chartok. Yes. No one else on the team has completed more than 5. The whole season.
Because they go through him as their main shooter. But to say Asgar and Elliot Chartok are the only players capable of initiating the New York deep
not
offense,
capable, but that's a mindset. It's that's their roles. That's who the offense goes to get Babbitt in the deep space. So if they're gonna have to adjust around that, that makes things iffy. Potentially.
I think for a lot of other teams, missing a player of Elliot Chartok's caliber would be immensely impactful. And I do think in this particular matchup, it will be felt for the Empire. Make no mistake about that. But you can easily list off 5 players who can step into that role and do fairly well. And as you even said, Asgar was unstoppable the last time that these two teams met. Elliot Chartok is fantastic. He was not the one causing problems for DC in the first meeting between these two teams. That was Jeff Babbitt, who we have yet to talk about and who is kind of who I'm circling as DC's biggest problem area right now between the Empire and the Breeze. And also, I just think, again, like Oliver Chartok has been stepping up into that role. Like Oliver Chartok has displayed some immense deep throws this season.
I do like him.
Continues to present a very problematic down lineup matchup for all opponents this season because there's so much talent in kind of the top 5 players of each of these New York defensive and offensive rotations that by the time you get to Oliver Chartok, who's all of a sudden 6'3" and with like 5 tool skills available, it's just, he's becoming like a breakout player for them. So I don't want to diminish Elliot Chartok whatsoever. He has been fantastic the past 2 seasons. And I totally agree with your point that he has been the main trigger puller for their deep looks. I just think that the Empire are clearly stacked with throwers. I don't think that they lack after the top 2.
Right. But I think the idea of like roles needing to shift a little bit could give DC more of an edge than they would have had otherwise, is all I'm saying. But you mentioned Jeff Babbitt. I think we should talk about Jeff Babbitt. Is there anything DC can do about Jeff Babbitt? Clearly the answer was no in their first meeting.
Yeah.
What was it, 7 goals and 3 blocks in that game? And like so many of the last 5 goals in that game were just Babbitt cutting to the front cone in the end zone. I think it was like one of the more unstoppable performances we've seen by like a pure receiver, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of reconstituted how we think of goal scorers in this league and their kind of importance. I think, for years, goals have kind of been the RBI of the AUDL, where they're certainly important, but it's kind of hard to distinguish the true significance of them in a team system and how much the finishing point matters over, say, the guy contributing the hockey assist or the pass that led to the pass that led to the assist. There's so many complexities with how offensive units work to just kind of anoint the goal scorer as the most important because their finishing in the end zone has always seemed a little absurd. But to your point, like watching Jeff Babbitt in week 3 kind of just visually refutes the idea of anyone else being more important than the guy continually able to get open and punch home goals in an overtime game. And you and I were talking about before the game, or before this episode, I should say, in these DC New York matchups that continually come down to buzzer beaters, 1-goal finishes, overtime, you name it. That's how this rivalry has articulated itself over the course of its history. When New York has arguably the 2 best players in existence at possession-based, red zone, tight situation, fourth quarter execution in Jack Williams and Jeff Babbitt, what do you do to disrupt that? How do you A, dispossess Jack Williams of the disc and get him out of rhythm? And then how do you B, slow down the absolute locomotive that is Jeff Babbitt, who is just now dead set on winning every single one-on-one matchup you put him against? And the thing is that New York's offense is so balanced, you can't double team him. They'll just figure out where the open person is elsewhere. And you see them doing that. You see them using Babbitt in certain situations like a decoy, and it just opens up completely wide backdoor assist to like John Lithia standing wide open in the corner of the end zone. There's not a good solution in close games against Williams Babbitt.
We don't see a lot of zone defense in the red zone, but that seems to be the only way you could stop Jeff Babbitt from just beating his matchup, right? Like you kind of have to
New York against Atlanta zone. Don't you remember?
No, I know. Well, the thing is, there's no right answer because it's New York. It's New York's offense we're talking about. Like, there's nothing that is gonna really rattle them. But as far as like stopping Jeff Babbitt, like if that is your one focal point, I don't know. I would try. I would just like throw some zones in the red zone to try and see if it changes anything.
It can't just be the one focal point though, because then it unlocks Ryan Asgar throwing against the zone, which might be the most acidic thing for his own defense. Is Ryan Asgar just settling in forehands wherever he pleases? Again, that's kind of what the Hustle came out and tried to do. They did a good job. They put a cap at times on that New York attack. It took work for the New York to get downfield. It's just that the Empire love work. Like, they love that stuff. They fall in love with those execution drives, and you could just feel Asgar being in rhythm by like the 5th point of the game. He had like 3 assists by that point already. Like, it was just, and you could just feel how problematic that was to allow Asgar to get into his spots and to just get rolling by like the 6-minute mark in the first quarter. It's like, oh no. If anything, I feel
it was
like
a problem very early.
he has done at times a good job of trying to shift him out of his spot, especially the East Division Championship game last year and in a couple matchups last year. But like 2023, Asgar just looked ferocious in that first matchup. He was welcoming all comers. You know, I think Babbitt gets a lot of that spotlight for kind of the imposing berserker quality of him shouting at the cone after he scores that late goal for the Empire. But like, Asgar has that confidence too. And when you allow him to get a few and to start getting into that mindset where he's skipping around and laughing all the time and just kind of like playing up tempo, like, he's an MVP for a reason. He is the most deadly all-around offensive player in the league for a reason. And I just feel like, yeah, you can overload on Babbitt, throw out a zone, like try and prevent that stuff, but then it just unlocks Asgar, and it's Ryan freaking Asgar.
I love that we haven't mentioned Ben Yacht yet either. I mean, we've been talking about the offense, to be fair.
He's been incredible.
But it is worth mentioning, Ben Yacht is 3 assists away from becoming the first player in AUDL history with 300 career assists and 300 career goals. So he had 4 assists in the first meeting with DC. Obviously, he had that towering sky over, who was it? Tyler Monroe and other guy, another poor soul in the deep space. I just feel like all of these games, there's got to be a signature Ben Yacht play towards the end of this game. So I'm excited for that as well.
Well, let's now flip it to DC's offense for a second, because they'll be without Jacques Nissen and Ben Ort. Ort, of course, having his breakout performance in the first meeting against New York. He just came alive in the second half and was truly a star for DC's offense in the way in which they continually went to him for responses after those big Babbitt goals for the Empire offense. And it just felt like that was a little bit of something that DC had lacked in prior seasons, a go-to downfield option that could just facilitate in that goal-scoring realm. I want to be a little careful here, because I wanted to bring up who has been a true anathema for the imposing New York defense, and that's been Christian Boxley, somebody you pointed out in the Players to Watch article. He has been dynamite against the Empire the past 2 seasons. He was fantastic in the playoff game last year. He had a hellacious sky in the open field in their first meeting this year. He continues to be, I think, on a pass-to-pass basis, the hardest player to guard in this league right now. If you just go watch the tape of Boxley in 2023, he's just scampering away from people. He's open all of the time. It makes everything almost easy. The only times he gets highlights are because discs float a little bit and then he gets to show off his outrageous hops. But other than that, the Christian Boxley highlight film of 2023 is him getting open at will. Like I wrote about this week too, like I don't think anybody creates separation like he does, not only for his acceleration and his speed, but for his timing. He, like Jack Williams, does so much easy work by using feints and hesitations, getting you a couple of looks early that really make you understand how fast and imposing he can be. And then from there, just kind of like bob and weaving around you to get to where he wants to go. He has been just so good at setting up everything for the DC offense. And you can just see on the numerous kinds of full field drives that they like to implement, Boxley just does so much work in that midfield, setting everything up. Even if he isn't going every other as a thrower, he's just constantly cycling and drawing defenders and sort of exposing areas. Earlier this year, I talked about him and Tyler Monroe kind of working almost as lock picks in the way they sort of like set everything up as the handler movement kind of like follows upfield with them. And when Monroe and Boxley are kind of working in that cog system, there's not a better, I think, small ball distribution hybrid cutter set in the league right now. Like it's just so pleasing and aesthetic to watch this DC offense, and it really gets like fine-tuned humming, and like Andrew Roy's in the backfield, just sort of doing these like break pivots to either side so they can use the full width of the field. Like Johnny Malks is capable of launching. Like it's funny. You mentioned Rowan and like where he fits. When I think of this DC 2023 offense, I don't know that I like picture him in it. And I know that's because he's started so much on defense, but even when he's been on offense, it's been kind of in a little bit more of a laid back role. It's really felt much more of the Christian Boxley and Andrew Roy offense so far, especially in the last few games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the other thing about Boxley that you don't really see too much from other cutters is just the full cutting dominance at all three levels of the field. Like when he's in the backfield too, and just like running throw and goes and handler motion, great at that too. Like, and he's got the downfield playmaking. And I think like most comfortably and maybe most prototypically, he is that like, dominant midfield cutter that can just find small spaces to get open and just like create separation at will. So yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think he's having a fantastic year, and he is kind of like the talisman of the DC offense right now. The Rowan thing is interesting. I do want to go back to that. Like, do you think they're worse off right now with Rowan on offense? Is it messing with a good thing?
No, Rowan's too good of a player. I think there are a handful of players in this league that just kind of get a pass and having that kind of almost like cynicism. Like, yes, I want to respect like what you're bringing up. Like, are you breaking something that doesn't need to be fixed, right? Like, are you tampering with something that is kind of a whole organism without this extra piece, without this star addition? I just think, like, given what Rowan has been for this franchise for almost a decade now, and, the way in which he just functions as a player on the field, he's never going to be taking things away from what you're doing. I think that there is at times this thing of they have like a gravity and an understanding of him when he's on the field where it almost like they become too Rowan dominant for how good they are elsewhere right now. Yeah. You talk about that MVP season in 2018 for Rowan. It was the Rowan show by and large. Yeah. Like he was the DC breeze that year. A lot of times, like they had to lean on him so much. And I still feel like the team has framework around that kind of almost over-reliance. And I think that you do see a bit of a strain now because they have so much other tools to distribute to. You have sort of Boxley completely coming into his own this year. You have Andrew Roy now on board, who has been one of, if not the top two throwers in the Central Division the past 2 years. You have Cole Jurek, who's been out for a few weeks, but has been fantastic in the beginning part of the season. You have Thomas Edmonds cycling onto both lines. You have just, I can keep going. We've talked again and again about how the Breeze starting offense can go 10 deep at times. And so to wrap it up, I think that there's a gravity at times with the way in which they become kind of singular and allowing Rowan to do everything that I do think can have the potential to be a detriment to the highest functioning ability of DC. But I can't say that like putting Rowan on offense is going to hurt DC. Like that's insanity.
Well, I particularly wonder in like the late game scenario where like we've seen New York Stars take over time and time again in these late game scenarios because the games are always super close and you're just going to your best players. Like, yeah, does DC maybe mostly play Rowan on defense, but then start switching him over to the offense for like the last few key points? Like, could you see something like that?
I worry more about that. I feel like I worry more about that than like doing like just kind of splitting the whole game. I don't think if the DC offense has gotten into rhythm that you all of a sudden just want Rowan quarterbacking. But again, I could be totally wrong. That's why we're sitting here behind microphones and not anywhere near a sideline.
Yeah. Well, the main takeaway is for DC. DC needs to do the transition into red zone defense. That's my coaching analysis for the game. That's what I want to see.
Why don't you email Daryl Stanley right now? That will surely be the best use of all of our times. No.
I'll just, after this is published, I'll email him just the link that goes to this spot in the podcast where it's like, hey, Daryl, check out this great take I had. It's worth a try.
You know, coaches, they love unsolicited opinions on how to implement strategy. I've learned that just countless times over the year. You want to message them completely out of the blue, kind of blindside them, like really get them just like, ugh, like they don't even know it's coming. Anyways, I like, again, this is one of those games where like I just kind of tuck in my bib and slide up to the table, right? Like there's not a part of this matchup that I'm not salivating over. These are two of the best teams in the league. Every single time it lives up to the hype. Like it is just kind of phenomenal to me how many times these two teams have played in really good games since at least 2018. Like 2018, I feel like is where everything kind of got like bumped up to this sort of crazy level of like, is every game going to finish in overtime or in a fourth quarter buzzer beater? But I just cannot wait for Friday night. I cannot wait for this matchup. And then what's really great is that it doesn't overlap at all with the other big matchup on Friday night, the Free Friday Frisbee event on YouTube, on AUDL YouTube. That will be produced by the Game of the Week crew. So you will have Evan Lepler on the mic doing play-by-play. Luke Johnson will be producing it. It's going to be a little bit of an elevated event. You're going to want to tune in for it, not only for that, but because Salt Lake and LA are playing like two of the best teams out west right now. Salt Lake, of course, number 2 in power rankings, have knocked off Colorado in both of their meetings this year, got the season sweep, sitting at 8-0, similar to the New York Empire, the 2 undefeateds left this season. Salt Lake also the best offense in the league so far, one of the best defenses, just continuing to churn on both sides of the disc. Meanwhile, Aviators riding a 5-game winning streak, but only because they've been playing opponents like Seattle, Portland, and San Diego for the past few weeks. But it is a big deal. You know, this Aviators team does look visibly different from how they did in the first month of the season to where they're at now. It really feels like that process has gelled. Whatever Sean McDougall said to Pavlianis several weeks ago to light that fire underneath of his butt has surely worked. And Pavel's sort of insistence and the just ferociousness and relentlessness that we see from his backfield play that we've seen from years has just sort of ignited, I feel like, the rest of this offense in the way that we were kind of theorizing in the offseason when this huge move came to be back in January, you know, when Giannis first announced he was going from Chicago to LA. We said multiple times, like, this Aviators team is so good kind of in the margins. They need sort of like a star activation to just like kick things into a higher gear. Pavel's been that. McDougall's been that. Van Dusen is playing as well as he's ever had. Evers Shapiro has picked up right where he left off last season when he ended his promising rookie year with a knee injury. He looks elevated, and he's just kind of got that edge that I think they need in a downfield receiver. Michael Keogh's been great. Sam Cook's been great. Marcel Osborne, when he's been available, has been a difference maker for the team. One of the most underrated players in the West Division, if not the league. He just continues to perform whenever he's slotted into a starting role. It feels like when he gets that kind of 20 points played threshold on offense, he's capable of scoring like 6 goals anytime he goes, or scoring 6 times anytime he goes out there, mixing in, throwing in assists. He's got a really balanced, dynamic game at this point in his career. I'm setting all this up to say, really like where the Aviators are heading. I really like everything in which they're kind of just grouping together and really leaning into this identity of offensive kind of drive-based possessions and defense, letting Lucas Ambrose just try to blow up some play and going for the counterattack. It's been much more successful this year than the past couple of seasons for the Aviators D-line. So, but for all the good things going for LA, they have not beaten a quality opponent. And right now, Salt Lake looks like the second most quality opponent in the league. What does LA need to do on Friday night to go for the upset against Salt Lake? Salt Lake is bringing basically their full strength roster. They will be without Devin Terry, who has been important to their defensive starting rotation. Everett Saunders, too, who's been fantastic as a rookie, will be gone for the rest of the year. So they're missing 2 of their defensive starters, but Salt Lake just seems to replenish when it comes to D-line. Like, they just have another 22-year-old, as Pavel said this week, USDA approved sort of shred head ready to go out of the packaging. Like, there's just no question about this Shred's defensive depth at this point. How can LA sort of get a foothold in this matchup? Like, where is sort of the give point where LA might have some success? Is it offensively? Is it how this offense has been playing?
Yeah, I would put the focus on offense, just given that seems to have been like the driving force of their winning streak. Like, I think their offense at the beginning of the season looked drastically different than it has in recent weeks. We were talking about how it kind of looked, I don't know, almost like separate pieces. Like, they had a lot of movement coming from like the Pavel and whoever he was paired with in the backfield. First it was Jason Valley, then it was Brandon Van Dusen, just like running dominator sets. I don't think that's what they want to do. Obviously, like, the more they've gotten Sean McDougall involved in that midfield space and just as a pure deep receiver, the better this offense has been, and the more it's like opened up for the other fill cutters too.
Is the league's leader in goal scoring help their offense? Sorry.
Yeah, it's looked a lot better with Sean McDougall active. But you know what I mean? Like with Marcel Osborne and Sam Cook and Keoy and Shapiro, like the other guys you mentioned, they're all kind of filling in around that one focus point in the cutting core, and I just think they look a lot more connected at this point. What I worry about is the fact that LA did go to Salt Lake and got blown out by the Shred. So when we're talking about these margins in the West Division, you compare LA to a team like Oakland, who went to Salt Lake, to Colorado, and played really well in both those games. I just think LA cannot stand to like just suffer another blowout loss or even like a 4 or 5 goal loss. Like, I think this margin has to be super narrow, even if they do lose, for me to like consider them still like a favorite for the 3 seed. Because it's like a prove it game to me. Like, can this offense keep their current trajectory going? Yes, they've looked great in recent weeks, but yeah, like we've said, hasn't been against the toughest of competition. So I think they're now well set up. They can like feel what it feels like to run this efficient offense that they have, and they know what it looks like in its best form. So now it's about like translating that to a much tougher defense. But like you said, Salt Lake is missing some guys. You know, I don't think the Salt Lake defense is quite as intimidating as maybe Colorado's is, but I think it's still top 10 defense statistically. So, you know, I'm not sure there will be a ton of room for LA errors offensively.
I would again pump the brakes on some of your skepticism around the Shred defense. I feel like they've been a top 6
It's
unit
not so much skepticism.
For how they played Colorado, especially, like they really knew how to kind of mess with the Summit enough to just get them disrupted and take advantage of both of those 1-goal wins. Like, I think that's Definitely a huge accomplishment given how much firepower is on that Colorado O-line. But I hear what you're saying. It's a little bit of the West Divisionification of defenses and stuff. Sometimes they'll have lots of block numbers, but you go and you watch the tape and it's a lot of easy upline power position throws
Well, I would also worry more about like Salt Lake's D-line conversion rather than just like their pure ability to shut down the LA offense. Like the Salt Lake D-line, I mean, we've seen them convert at a significantly higher rate than they were last year. And so like that's where the danger lies for LA. Like if they suffer some early game turnovers offensively, Shred obviously have as good an ability as any other team in the league to really open up a game with a series of breaks. So like that is just not what LA can handle, because LA's defense just isn't quite at that level. Like they're not going to get the Salt Lake offense enough out of rhythm where LA can start rattling off these breaks to answer. Like it's just not going to happen.
And that's where I'm concerned with LA, because they have some pretty significant defensive starting absences, starting with Andrew Padula, who's been their second leading block getter this year, despite starting in the handler set. Padula has just been fantastic as a team veteran on the D-line so far. Milan Ravenel will be out. He's been great at taking bigger matchups and just at least giving the wide receiver ones on other team a little bit more size to deal with. Daniel Brunker continues to miss time for this team, and Zach Schachner, who has been great at kind of getting fill blocks in the end zone. He had a Callahan 2 weeks ago now. This last weekend, He had a great end zone denial at a pretty key point in the LA's comeback win at home against San Diego. Those are 4 pretty key pieces for an LA defense that doesn't go especially deep. They do have, again, the league leader in blocks in Lucas Ambrose, who feels like a one-man wrecking ball crew at times. He got the game-clinching block last weekend against the Growlers, helped push LA's lead to 3 late in the fourth quarter. He continues to be, I think, the most singular, impactful defender outside of maybe Cody Spicer in the league right now at just causing offensive disruption and generating turnovers from his singular play. But outside of Ambrose, how are you going to deal with the Salt Lake offense that goes essentially 8 deep, that is now starting to practice weekly with Grant Lindsley, who the first few months was coming in remotely and joining the team only for games? He's only going to get more integrated and build more chemistry with this team. They're only going to learn more from one of the most winningest and accomplished players to ever play this game. There isn't a weak link on this offensive rotation. They have 8 players completing above 94% throws. No other team in the league has anywhere close to that kind of number among their top offensive starters. They are completely in sync every game. They have confidence with every piece. We talk all the time about how offenses kind of exist as like 2 to 3 separate units at times. You kind of got the backfield and how the backfield plays in with the hybrid units, and they kind of got like the downfield continuation space and your finishing receivers, right? With this Salt Lake team, every piece or every unit that kind of meshes with another aspect of the Shred offense is well-oiled and working together. It's just a thing of, I feel like at this time in the season and giving their absences, this is about the worst matchup draw that the Aviators could have on their 5-game winning streak. Like they just, I don't know how they get to a Shred offensive attack that is this balanced, that doesn't, last year I would say if Lucas Ambrose could just go out and guard Jordan Kerr and disrupt him a little bit, hey, maybe you get to the Salt Lake offense just a teeny bit. I think Kerr can do kind of whatever he wants in a series of games, and he's been fantastic this year, but they clearly do not rely on him whatsoever to get scoring and drives accomplished. He is absolutely an MVP finalist so far, and yet at the same time, the Shred feel like they can still win a lot of these games because of how well the whole system is working.
Yeah. Well, and then I also worry if the Salt Lake offense does turn it over, their O-line defense has looked really good too. And they're running zones with that offense out there. Like, again, given those absences with LA, if they are able to get break opportunities, which it doesn't seem like there's going to be many, I just don't trust them to convert enough to really like open up the game at any point. So I really just think it's going to be about LA's offense trying to keep pace with, I think it's still the best offense in the league from an efficiency standpoint.
It is.
It's like, yeah. So, and what's LA? Is LA top 10? Maybe I should check now.
I would have to go and double check what
they're
LA
around
is.
10.
They're right around. They've been pushing into the top 10. They still have some not scattered throughout. I feel like this last week, even when San Diego took its lead, was because the offense had some disruptive behavior going on.
Yeah,
the Aviators team is still so new. They still don't have that many reps together on offense. I mean, you look at their rotations compared to, say, like an indie team who you can go back several seasons and essentially pull out the same core of players.
Yeah.
Like, Aviators sure have that existing core from last season, but even that was a relatively new formation for LA. They continue to look like a team who very understandably goes through hot and cold streaks. Like that's kind of, I think, what we thought of as LA this season. It's just that the Shred might be the worst team to try to go up against because their offense requires you to disrupt them at some point. Otherwise, they're going to convert at like a 65% level just on their own. And that puts pressure on your defense then to generate turnovers. And I just think that that's a rock in the hard place that LA is going to get caught between, where they're absent these defensive starters. And so their offense is going to have to play excellent. It's going to be added pressure. And the Shred defense is just going to know to launch 1,000 layout block attempts against them to try to get some kind of rattle going. Like that's exactly how Salt Lake has started to play every team. It's like, our offense is the most dangerous in the league, and our defense is then going to be like a shark pit beneath your offense every single time you make a mistake. Anytime there's a disc too floaty, anytime you kind of short and underthrow and one of our layout block artists gets to just go hunt, like, I don't know. I worry a little bit about that, but
all right, I've got my coaching suggestion for the game for LA. And it is to play Sean McDougall on every point. O&D, make sure he is out there at all times, because that does give the D-line obviously significant firepower in the counterattack, but another playmaking defender, a guy that I would love to see on Jordan Kerr, one of those other top matchups. So I want Sean McDougall to play like 40 points this game.
I like that Sean McDougall has been using the like Ash Ketchum when he's serious. He puts his hat on backward now.
He does.
He'll have a turn and then he'll put his hat on backwards and like get a point block immediately and like rage spike in the ensuing bookend score. Like, I love it. No, that's a fantastic coaching strategy. Just play your star every point of the game.
Put Sean McDougall on the field all the time.
User controlled Sean McDougall. I do think if LA is to win this, it's just going to have to come behind another insano game from Giannis and McDougall, which has been happening during this win streak. Like, those two have a packed reel right now of their red zone possessions of just playing like basically Goaltimate style give and goes, where one of them is settling into a pocket as a receiver and the other one's just like dishing a scoober or something easily up line in between coverages. Like, if LA can continue to get into spots where they've been hot lately, I do think that they can keep pace offensively a bit with Salt Lake. Just a little bit. I don't know for 4 quarters. No,
right. I guess that's right about it too.
4 quarters right now. Like, it hasn't been done.
Yeah, and we haven't seen the Shred offense look iffy at any point this year, right? I mean, I guess in that first Colorado game, they weren't perfect, but they were down the stretch, and like I think that's also where the trust goes to Salt Lake. Like, in the fourth quarter, I would trust them to close out the game if it is close through 3.
Well, Friday's matchup is just the first game of Salt Lake's weekend. They will then head to San Diego on Saturday night for the game of the week against the 2-6 Growlers, looking to save their season, stave off possibly breaking their 4-season-long playoff streak. Growlers, of course, making the postseason every single year since 2017, the last time San Diego missed the postseason. I think this game has a little bit more feud, rivalry, bad blood to it than maybe just the first blush presents, because going back to last season, beginning of last season, entering 2022, San Diego entered as one of, if not the favorite to win the division. Obviously, Colorado came in right out the gate with a whole bunch of talent, but the Growlers had previously qualified for 2 straight championship weekend appearances. There aren't a whole bunch of franchises in this league who can say the same. Growlers had been the best of the West throughout the beginning and immediately after the pandemic. It seemed like they had built a very solid foundation, and I still think that exists this season, despite being 4 games under 500. And this Growlers team, again, enters 2022 week 1. They draw the Shred for their first ever game, and they get to experience what we now know of the athleticism, the kind of tenacity that the Shred team brings to every matchup. And it overwhelmed the Growlers a bit. They played well in that week 1 loss. That was a back and forth barn burner of a game that went right down to the wire in the fourth quarter. And the Shred simply had more moxie and energy in that matchup, in those final moments. And, the Shred went on to win the next 2 matchups of that season. They swept the season series. They eliminated the Growlers from the playoffs in the first round. They moved on to a West Division Championship game. I guarantee you this Growlers team remembers all of that. And I guarantee you the San Diego team also remembers that in 2 of those matchups, they were right in it with the Shred up until the end. That playoff game, Salt Lake took a decided early lead. They kind of got their brake train rolling in front of a huge home crowd. But I think a lot of people forget Growlers edged back so well in that game and got within 2 or 1 goal in the third quarter. Jordan Kerr went out with an injury, and San Diego just sort of ratcheted themselves right back into it. This team competes with everybody despite some of the final scores this season. Even last week, they held a lead against LA in LA for, half that game, it felt like. This Growlers team is now near full strength on Saturday. They will be without Steven Milardovich, who will be a big blow. He's been super good for them in 2023. But the Growlers have some offensive talent that could challenge the Shred on the second game of a back-to-back. You talk about Travis Dunn and what he's been producing basically as the league's leading offensive producer whenever he started this year. He's averaging, close to 700 yards a game and over 7 scores in 5 appearances in 2023, something like that. The rookie Max Gibson, he's been fantastic for the Growlers offense this year. 6'5", just knows his size downfield, has incredible throws in the continuation game, just has an unlimited power on his backhand. He will be an individual matchup problem for Salt Lake, no matter who they put on him. Kyle Rubin is active in this game. He's been really excellent as a captain for the Growlers offense. Tyler Bacon is active after being inactive for a couple weeks. Paul Lally is active after... Did he play last? He played last weekend, but he's been on and off again. The Growlers have pieces to challenge the shred. Again, I worry a little bit about defensively what they're going to do outside of Jordan Queckborner to contain some of the individual talent on the shred. But offensively, this could be an opportunity for San Diego to take a page out of Oakland's book the other weekend and challenge one of the West's best teams in the open field and kind of turning it into a track meet. The Growlers have looked fairly successful in doing that against LA in their 2 recent meetings. They dropped both games, but they pressured the Aviators defense with Dunn and Gibson continually engaging that vertical attack. And I just feel like, for the sake of argument, Shred could experience that come Saturday night. If the Growlers come in tuned up, if they kind of play like their backs against the wall, like this Growlers team doesn't go down easily. Like there's not a whole bunch of opportunity to just construct runs against them and create padding. They like to linger. They like to make each of the edges a little bit more difficult. And I think this year, Salt Lake won't be quite prepared for how much more athletic the Growlers got in 2023 compared to 2022. A lot of their rookies and stuff are a lot faster and a lot more explosive than the team that Salt Lake played in the playoffs last year. And I just think, similar to how the Shred kind of came out of the gates in week 1 last year and kind of ran at the Growlers a little bit, San Diego might be able to return the favor on Saturday night, having full rest, and the Shred coming off of a tough battle in LA.
Yeah, maybe. It's almost a similar thing when I think about the LA game and the San Diego game. There's just going to be so much pressure on that San Diego offense to somehow keep pace with the Shred offense. Because again, it's like, it's a slightly weaker D-line. You know, like that's not going to be what defines this game for San Diego. It's going to be like, okay, can Travis Dunn, Paul Lally, Max Gibson, can they just
Stephon Samu?
play?
Stephon Samu, that's who I was forgetting about.
Stephon Samu,
excellent.
He's
excellent
a playmaker.
Yeah.
Yes, and I like him defensively. I liked him on offense too. I think they just have to play like near mistake-free ultimate, like by their standards. And Dunn has had like 3 or more throwaways in 4 of his 5 games so far. Their one win that he played in was that game that he was mistake-free and threw like 8 assists against Portland. So it's just it's gonna take this next level efficiency from like not that deep a lineup of offensive players. So I just worry about, again, the 4-quarter ability of that offense to like stay in it and really click throughout the game. But I mean, you're right. They do just fight in every game. This Growlers team, I mean, even when they were getting blown out by Austin, when they went to Austin, it was like 12-4 at half or something ridiculous. Like they clawed their way back. And I think there is something just like top to bottom of this roster, even though it doesn't seem the deepest, they're like gonna get some production out of guys that you've probably never heard of before. So there's some element to the San Diego team where I just feel like, yeah, there is a world in which they pull off this upset, given that it will be Salt Lake's second game of a back-to-back weekend. But it just like on paper, when you look at the strengths of both these teams, I just see Salt Lake out converting them in pretty much every facet. So what, in your opinion, what would be better for the LA game for San Diego? Like, would it be better if Salt Lake plays like a I don't know, wire-to-wire game? Maybe it's like a 2-goal win in the end, but like they have to battle super hard throughout. Or what if they just like mow right through LA and win by like 5 to 10 goals and are just like feeling great, and then the Growlers come in and maybe take advantage of a more lax Salt Lake mindset? Do you think that's better?
I don't think Salt Lake gets lax off of 10-goal wins. I think that's how they ratchet up. They're so big play-oriented. They're still so young. I just feel like when you give them the bit in their mouth, that's exactly what they need. They need that confidence. I mean, look at how they play just with more confidence this year versus last year. I mean, I feel like that has been some of the smoothness in establishing less turnovers and less things. I don't know how much more talented the 2023 shred are from 2022 top to bottom. I think they understand themselves so much more thoroughly, and that's why you don't want to give them that confidence. And, you know, obviously Grant Lindsay, amazing player, has meant a world of difference. And yet Salt Lake has shown that they can win without him. You know, they won that game in Colorado without him. They win with their team depth and their balance. And so I don't think you want them confident. I think you want them just questioning a little bit their now, you know, topmost perch in the division. And Salt Lake, you know, their motivation this weekend is one win gets them into the playoffs either way. An LA win all but secures first place in the division. Like, they would need essentially one other win to come in their final 2 games or 3 games. 2 games. Yeah. 2 games after this weekend.
2 games after this weekend. Yes.
Empire. I forget what their other game is. But a victory over LA would essentially, because there's 3 teams right now in the West with 3 losses in Oakland, Colorado, and LA. If Salt Lake gets 9 wins, the fewest wins they can have is, or the fewest losses they can have is 3. The most losses. All right, now throw it out. This is why I don't talk math.
We know for sure if they win both games. Actually, no. They have the tiebreaker over Oakland and Colorado.
If they win both games, they lock up first place.
They only need to beat LA though, because then no other team can pass them. Because LA would be at 4 losses.
Oh, because their other game is against Oakland. That's right.
Yeah, they have the tiebreaker over both Colorado and Oakland. So yeah. Okay. So they just have to beat LA.
See, this is why I wanted to talk through it out loud. I knew I had one.
We got there.
But we got there. And again, that's I think why I worry about giving them confidence. Like, if Salt Lake is then 1 game away from securing their first division title, regular season division title, like, that's a big deal for the Shred team. That's what they kind of established this organization for, was being sort of the preeminent example, along with the Utah Wild, of what Utah Ultimate is capable of. And I think being able to plant that flag on, hey, year 2, we overcame Colorado and we got this, you know, regular season division crowd. Let's go host a playoff game. I think that would be just a tremendous sense of catharsis for a Shred team that has sort of just like steadily summited this mountain. No pun intended. I really didn't intend for that.
Oh, you had to throw it in there.
I didn't. That was all top.
Your
brain.
Subconscious had to throw it in there.
Let's get quickly to the last couple of things we wanted to talk about. Let's stick out west with Colorado. They go to Portland on Friday night, then to Seattle on Saturday. It feels like a pretty secure road weekend for the Summit. They've already done a 2-0 road weekend sweep this season. They started their franchise with one last year doing the same Pacific Northwest trip. Portland is reeling. Seattle will be without Khalif El-Salam, so it doesn't quite feel like they might have the horse, and Jack Brown, so it might not feel like they have the offensive horses capable of running with the Summit. But the Summit may possibly be without Jonathan Nethercutt and Cody Spicer. They're 2 clear team leaders 2023. So I'm going to pass on Friday. On Saturday night, I do think that, again, there is a little bit of a blueprint on how to beat the Summit on the second game of a back-to-back, and that's turn it into a track meet. And the Cascades, with Garrett Martin, with Zeppelin Ronig, with how this offense likes to run at home in Seattle, I do think that if Colorado is without Spicer on the second game of a back-to-back, there could be the possibility that the Scades make it interesting on Saturday night. I'm not saying that that's a probability or anything like that. I expect Colorado to take care of business. All I'm saying is that Oakland showed how a young team who isn't afraid to look deep and kind of test one-on-one confidence matchups can have success against Colorado this season, particularly if Cody Spicer isn't available or something. So Zeppelin Ronig is kind of in the prototype mold of what the Spiders were doing with Keenan Lawrence, Dexter Clyburn, Max Williams, etc., of just going to trusted receivers deep in one-on-one coverage, you know, and Garrett Martin is leading the league in assists this year and is just become a completely different player, I think, than what we had of him coming into 2022. You know, he's developed this just complete throwing repertoire, and more importantly, again, getting back to this confidence thing, a sense of himself in the system. It felt like a little bit last year, he got lost in the shuffle playing on that shred D-line. He still had his moments. He was still a team leader. But compared to how he kind of played as a rookie in 2021 with the Cascades, it felt like a little bit of a downward turn in 2022. Man, has he rebounded from that returning to Seattle. He's a flamethrower right now at the disc. And so I think if he gets into a rhythm and the Colorado show any kind of fatigue, that could be an issue. I don't think Colorado does that. I think the Summit have kind of shown they're a team that learns from their mistakes. They're not just going to keep tumbling down a hole. They're going to kind of rally. And I just expect, even if they get into a similar scenario as they did a couple weekends ago on the road in Oakland, they're going to have a lot more responses than just sort of overriding Alex Atkins and Cody Spicer down the stretch to the point where they're just fatigued in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I think the game would maybe feel different if they hadn't just had like a big 10-goal statement win over Minnesota. Like I feel like that was just kind of righting the ship exactly when they needed to. So I think their confidence is probably where it's been. Like I don't think they were ever too worried about that loss to Oakland. But yeah, I mean, you're right. I think if Garrett Martin kind of single-handedly willed them to that win in San Diego, right? Didn't he have like 11 scores
assists.
in that game?
9
assists.
Just...
Right. So, it's gonna take something like that. Zeppelin's gonna have 10 goals. Martin's
but they could. Like that's the thing. Like Seattle,
I know
it's
in
letting those two go play video game ball and just rack up NASA stats. That seems to be one of the ways that you might be able to attack Colorado. I just don't know if I expect that. Kai Marshall will be active again for Colorado. We had a lot more hype. Injuries have kind of derailed some of that, but it'll be interesting to see if Spicer isn't available, if Marshall might get some of those big, deep matchups. We might get to see some Kai Marshall and Zeppelin Ronning matchups. That would be super exciting. Final matchup I wanted to talk about today takes place in the East Division, and we started off the preview episode talking about 4-4 Boston, kind of reeling right now. Have lost 4 of their last 5 games, taking on Toronto, who are rebounding a bit. They are 4-4. They're coming off back-to-back wins. Those wins are just coming against 2 of the bottom 6 teams. 3 of Toronto's 4 wins have been against their countrymen from Montreal. Their other win coming against Pittsburgh 2 weeks ago. The Rush offense is without a doubt loaded with playmakers. Every week it seems like someone is stepping up alongside James Lewis and Ty Barbieri to have just incredible games. 2 weeks ago, it was McKee. This last weekend, it was Keith McRae, Luke Comire, Ryan Polaz. The throwing core of this Rush offense continue to set the table really well. And when the Rush can get into fast break and huck looks, they look really at home. It's just that when you sort of disrupt that offensive flow and their A1 game, the Rush don't have a whole bunch of looks. And right now, Boston is still playing in a way that I think their defense has kind of been their best feature. And they'll be returning Bertoli to the lineup, who has been their defensive leader for the past 2 seasons. I think that Boston could potentially find a lot of success on the road against the Rush team, who, when they start playing bad, it kind of comes in bunches. And I just feel like this is going to be a very uneven game. Like, I don't know that the Rush will be able to just turn this into a track meet, although they do that a lot in Toronto. Like, I do think
they like really playing at home
in Toronto. Something about that Frisbee Stadium field just really lights up the Huck game for both teams, and that just simply favors the Rush's style of attack, and not so much Boston, who like to look deep. They will have some weapons this week. Ben Sedok returns their roster, Ray Tetro returns their roster, Cole Davis Brand, but they're not the most efficient hucking team in the league.
Yeah, it's so hard to get a pulse on really both of these teams because, even Toronto, when they played Philly in Toronto, that game was just like, it was very similar to the DC game that Toronto played last year, where it was just like so much back and forth, just offenses playing super efficiently and not making mistakes. But then eventually, like, Toronto kind of in the end of the third, fourth quarter, like the wheels fell off a little bit. So Philly was able to take advantage of that. But for most of that game, like, they were connecting on those deep shots. Like, that is clearly when their offense looks the best. And I just think when they're not in that rhythm, I just don't I don't know what kind of team they are. Like, I don't know that they have it in them to really play like possession ball. Whereas Boston, I couldn't even describe their offensive identity right now. Maybe part of the reason is they've had so many different lineup changes throughout the season. Like, sometimes they have Orion Cable, sometimes they don't. Obviously, he is a big focal point when he is active. Ray Tetro, you mentioned him. I think he's been super involved just in the midfield and also as a thrower. In that last game against New York, that was his last game of the season. I think he threw 4 assists, which was a career high, and 200 throwing yards. So he's kind of been evolving. They seem to have good contributions offensively, but again, I don't really know what it means for the outlook of this team as a whole. I think I agree with you that their defense has been more defining to that point. So yeah, if they can start restricting Toronto, especially early, and not let Toronto get in any sort of first quarter rhythm, because that was sort of what happened with Toronto and Philly. It was just right off the bat, Toronto was just converting every single possession in the first quarter, Philly doing the same thing, and it was an offensive showcase.
Yeah. It was 50 combined goals scored. It was the first 5 points are Alex Thorne, 80-yard deep throw from a standstill.
Right. It was puck after puck.
James Lewis cutting 70 yards deep, layout goal. A lot of these Toronto games become that. And I think that it does favor Toronto. I just think that Boston, especially with Bartoli in the lineup, he's kind of been a giant killer over the years. He's good at guarding people in space. If he draws the James Lewis matchup, I think that could be really interesting. Gus Haflin has been playing well this season for Boston's D-line. Rocco Linehan has given them another athletic defender. They also have this kind of grip of young talent that is continuing to spot start and doesn't really have a whole bunch of consistency, but I do think gives them more defensive pop than they've had the past 2 seasons. And so I think that if Rush play as loose as they've been playing against their recent opponents, it might spell a little bit of trouble for a Glory team that, to your point, I still don't know entirely how to read them.
I just don't know how good they are.
Right. But I think that they have more of an ability to find themselves in the margins than they have in previous seasons.
Yeah.
I think the last weekend against
there.
They could have let go of the rope much earlier than they did. They really forced DC to kind of win it as opposed to the Glory just giving away a game. And I feel that's been a big difference for Boston this year. It feels like they really know when to apply themselves. The New York game might have not been the greatest example. Empire have a just way of running away from everyone in this league if you give them any amount of break opportunities. But I think in this matchup where Toronto is still going to have their mistakes, that Boston could take advantage. I did want to flip it over for just a second and talk about Toronto's defense, who will be once again without Phil Turner. He hasn't been in the lineup of late. Their all-star, the league leader in blocks last year. He hasn't been available. Perplexingly enough, last weekend was one of the best defensive performances Rush has had in the past few seasons. They converted their most amount of breaks since 2019, I believe. And It's just one of those things where it's interesting how some of these much younger teams respond absent some of their leaders. We talked about Oakland the other week getting that huge win against Colorado minus Chris Lung and Mac Hecht on offense. Toronto gets kind of the season-saving win this past weekend in a certain sense against Montreal, and it's without their team leader in Phil Turner. And I think that it's a good indication for where Toronto is trending in this season, that they can have an absence of that caliber and still get a 7-goal win at home with maybe their most impressive defensive performance. Now, I'll issue the caveat here that it's against the Montreal Royale team that is abysmal at scoring, is the worst in the league this season, and is one of the bottom 5 teams ever in terms of points per game. So, to get on track defensively, good for Toronto. Love to see it this weekend against the Boston offense. I think it will be kind of set for a track meet. You talk about track meet speed, this is what Rush like to play into. Yeah. Best track athlete is going to be on the Glory and Ray Tetro. That dude used to actually run track.
Don't you feel like Boston hasn't really been in these track meets this year? I don't know, they haven't really been in super high scoring games, whereas in the past, that was maybe more of their offensive identity. It was just letting Cole Davis-Brand, Ben Sadok just launch the disc, and Willie Stewart too, when they had Willie Stewart on the team. But yeah, it's just kind of been a shift where I feel like Boston wants to be in a low-scoring game, and Toronto I feel like always wants the opposite, So it's kind of an interesting blend of styles this week.
It will be a style clash. There will be a series of those throughout the week. This will do it for the Week 10 preview pod of Swing Pass. We're going to get going. We'll be back in just a couple of days to recap all of this action, but don't forget you can tune in for all of it starting tomorrow night on both watch.audl.tv as well as AUDL YouTube for that free Friday Frisbee matchup between Salt Lake and LA. We'll be watching along with you as always. And as always, thank you for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon. Bye now.